We're really excited to bring you all this information about ground handling. Great ground handling skills, boy, it'll make you launch better, give you great active piloting integration with your glider. A lot of satisfaction comes from good ground handling, and it's something you can do in your park at home and with your buddies. Turn it into a sport, so you chase each other around a ball field. And with that comes a sense of accomplishment, that you know you can make a launch successful. You know that you can get out in the air and feel your glider. You can tell where it is. You can keep the pitch and roll right where it's supposed to be. Boy, that sure is nice. So within this video, we're going to focus on a number of different things that you'll find really useful. We're going to show you how to hook into your glider so it doesn't blow away from you, how to build a wall, how to move the glider around on the hillside in both reverse and forward positions. We're going to show you how to effectively get that glider up, get turned around into a forward-facing position so you can make your launch. A good body position for making your launches so that you can be comfortable that you can accelerate the glider into the air. So sit back, get ready to view this thing a few times because there's a lot of information here. If you are going to set up on the side of a hill where it is windy, let's have the glider in a rosette like this. We can then take the tips and pull the tips out just a tad, enough to make sure that the lines are clear from the tips so you don't have a line over, but not stretched out enough that it flops around in the wind. I have the leading edge exposed with more than enough available cells to gather some air to nurse the glider open to a wall. Now I'm going to stretch the lines out. By the way, this kind of technique can be really useful in an area that's got a lot of foliage or rocks, things like that, because you can set your lines through a nice narrow area that you've pre-cleared and thus reduce the chance of hooking up a line and fouling your launch. Now with the glider in this rosette, partially open, I should be able to see whether the lines are clear. And holding onto my A's, I can identify that the A's on both sides look clear and go ahead and proceed to hook in. I am going to make sure that my brake line is not across the top of the risers. Now, in hooking in, I want to take each riser, and because I'm right-handed, I turn left out of my reverse position. I'll take each riser and turn it half a turn to the left and have to bring them across my body. With a left rotation out of a reverse position, I need to have the riser that's going to my left hip on top of the one that goes to my right hip. Now if you're a left-handed person, you'd hook in so that you would rotate right. And the reason that we rotate to the left if we're right-handed or to the right if we're left-handed is so that eventually when you learn to do tandem flights, that you're not sweeping your reserve parachute against your passenger. If a big gust comes through with my glider in a rosette, I should be in a good position to keep from being blown away. I'm going to wait for a more moderate cycle, put both A's in one hand, and I hold the risers so that I have the metal links right in the palm of my hand. That way I can feel what I have a hold of. If I hold on to the lines, they slip through my fingers, I don't know where I'm at. Or if I hold on to just the risers, they'll slip through my fingers. So I like to hold on to the metal links. I'll reach underneath, hold on to the rear riser metal links, look over my shoulder to see what's coming. Watching through the grass and the bushes, I can get a good eye on what type of cycles are coming up the slope. When we get the right cycle, I'll go ahead and add a little bit of a riser to my glider, and at the same time counterbalance with the rears and get the glider to open up into a nice wall. That feels like that might be about enough right there. I'm going to go ahead and open the glider up. And there we go. Now, once the glider's opened up, I may want to go ahead and hold on to each rear riser. And the reason for that, in the event that a strong gust comes through, now I can run at the glider and pull back on my rear risers and keep the glider from getting away from me. In a position where it's become too strong for you to fly or you need to put your glider away, we found that a couple of techniques can help you put the glider away in high winds. We want to keep these rear risers, the C's and D's, staggered back, and then bring the lines together in a good grouping with those rear risers staggered back and walk towards the glider, lifting it into a rosette. Now, some areas, the terrain features or foliage don't allow you to do that without snagging the glider. So you need to be quite careful. If you're on a nice grassy area, then you can actually just walk around the end of your glider in order to take the gustiness or wind out of the glider. When gathering the glider, I'll go ahead and run my thumb and forefinger towards the glider so that as I add loops to my other hand, I have plenty of strength here and don't lose control of the glider. Now then, in a reverse position, it's best to have a lot of flexibility with your hands. I can have my hands on either A or on my rear risers, or I could have one rear riser and one A, or come over to here and do something like this. So you want to practice a lot of inflations where your hands educate themselves. They develop a body memory of being able to go from the A risers down to your rear risers with confidence. All right, I'd like to have you go to the park and practice inflating the glider a little ways and then reaching to your rear risers to put the glider on the ground. If you get a hold of your brake line, the rear riser, or even the C riser, any of those things will lay the glider back down. It's important that you're looking over your shoulder to see what kind of air is flowing towards you. That's your future. Staring at a windsock in the background, that's your past. So again, mini inflations, then reaching to the rear risers and laying the glider back down. Doing 50 of them is a good idea. Where your hips are positioned make a big difference. If you do things so that you have one foot forward and the other foot back, which is a typical athletic stance, you actually offset your hips, which offset the risers. You notice that these risers aren't lined up evenly, and that'll put a turn in your glider. So it's a really good idea that you keep your hips squared up to the glider in order to get a good square inflation. As the glider comes up, if you can, among all the other things that you're thinking about, keep in mind that what you do with your hips can affect how the glider turns, you'll have a lot more success. Let me show you what I mean. So once the glider starts to come up overhead, what I do turning my hips can affect how the glider behaves. So if the glider comes up and it goes off to one side and I turn my body, I can actually straighten the glider without even my hands. I don't do a lot of that, but it's something that can affect people quite a bit. They don't even realize that when they're having a problem with the glider, that they actually are throwing their hips the exact wrong way. So a key component to successful ground handling is to keep yourself right in the center of the glider. You should be looking right through the two center A lines right to the center of the glider. If you find that the glider is drifting off to one side, then you need to move with it and stay under the center of the glider. Notice that my hands continually go back and forth between the A's and the rears. And I'm not looking at these risers. I'm actually looking straight out, keeping a horizon reference so I can see what kind of bank angle I have on the glider. Works well. So while I'm doing these management exercises, and you can practice at the park bringing the glider up slightly crooked and then following it across a slope or across the park. As it starts to come overhead, reaching to your rear risers. And all of that will help you fine-tune your competence and understanding how the glider works. But I don't look at those risers because I know where they should be. I can bring my palms in towards my face and find those rear risers very easily because I've done it many times. And you can see my hands doing that now. Now, are you able to focus on that? So I just opened the glider up back into a nice usable wall. I'm going to bring it on up overhead and reach to my rear risers and let the glider actually pull me up the slope a ways, going back and forth between my A risers and my rear risers in order to get everything just right and put myself back in my original position. Now you'll notice that the glider is actually folded under. Now, do I have to call my friend and ask them to come and move the glider for me? Well, not really. I should be able to use this nice breeze that's blowing through here in order to unfurl the glider. In order to do this, I'm going to focus on the side of the glider that has air available to it. This side of the glider over here is still open, and I can feed air from that side of the glider through the side that's closed. I'm going to take a hold of the A riser that goes to that open side of the glider, reach to the rear riser that goes to the open side of the glider to feed some air through the glider. Quite careful managing my glider to not slam it into the ground any harder than I don't want to say have to, but it just happens automatically. At any rate, when opening the glider off this one-handed position, it's important that you're ready to let go with your right hand and sweep around to your rear riser on the other side in order to keep the glider lying down on the ground. As we've seen more heat develop in the springtime and summer, there can be a lot of accumulated heat on the hillside. That accumulated heat on the hillside can trigger loose when you move your glider, and you'll suddenly be picked up when you don't expect it. Even though the breeze seems light, you'll actually trigger a puddle of heat that's accumulated against the hill. So be ready to move toward your glider with your inflation so that you can offset some energy. Let's suppose my glider flips over and I need to bring it back across into the wind. A lot of times we can affect that by just simply pulling on our brake line, and the glider will come back across smoothly. It's important, as the stronger the winds get, that you maintain a healthy wall, that you keep a good portion of your glider balanced against the wind, and you can lean back against your glider in order to do that. If you let the nose of the glider down, the leading edge of the glider down too far, in the wrong conditions, air can get underneath the trailing edge, and the glider then becomes difficult to manage. All right, so bring the glider up, turn it all the way over. Then it might be best in that situation to gather the glider to flip it back over. Yanking on the glider in this situation probably won't do it any good. I can toss the glider back across my body and pull it back into a little bit of a rosette, and then work against the nice breeze in order to regroup my wall. Putting both A's in one hand, both rears in the other, nurse a little air into the glider, and there we once again have a nice wall. When doing reverse kiting practice, it's important for you to keep your brake toggles attached. Otherwise, they'll flop around and can become entangled with the rest of the lines on your glider. So if they become detached, take a moment to reattach them. Look down the slope to see what type of air is coming at us. Obviously, if I saw quite a bit of sudden movement in the grass down below me, I'd probably refrain from trying to bring my glider up. As a matter of fact, while just standing here, I'll quite often, usually, hold on to a C or D riser in order to keep the glider in what we call a parked position. If an errant piece of wind comes through, it shouldn't grab the glider and pull it away from me if I have a hold of my rear risers. If I need to move my glider across the slope, I go to my A risers, and moving the glider this direction, I actually want to lift this riser just a little bit higher. So if the glider's on a tilt, I follow the glider across the slope, find the spot that I want to use for my launch, for example, and lay the glider back down. If I want to move the glider this direction, I go ahead and lift up this side of the glider a little bit higher so it has just a tad of a tilt to it, and follow it across the slope, reaching to my rear risers, and then putting the glider back down. These are great things to practice at your park at home. Practicing moving to your left, moving to your right, moving down slope and up slope in reverse position will give you a lot of skill. It'll also give you confidence for bringing your glider up and making your turnaround for launch. When I've decided I'm going to go ahead and face forward, and I really believe that forward-facing kiting is far more important than this reverse kiting that we've been looking at. We want to take the brake and put it in its proper hand. I'm going to go from the carabiner along the rear riser, find the brake handle, and put that brake handle or control handle that's on my left side in my left hand. I'm going to do the same thing here on my right side. Go to my A risers, and I'm now back in the same position I was before, treating the glider in a very similar fashion to all of the reverse kiting that we were just taking a look at. I'm going to feel like the conditions are appropriate, bring the glider up. If it's blowing hard, I'll walk underneath the glider, and then add a little brake while I make my rotation. I'm going to lean forward in order to have a good balance point, and keep my hands fairly high. I may be running about 1 or 2 pounds of pressure, and you'll notice that I have a wrap of line around my hand, and that gives me a little better authority over the glider if I need to add a bit more brake. Now in this position, I think you need to learn how to make turns where you can jog across to your right, now I'll jog across to my left. I'm watching the horizon mostly. I'm not looking at the glider. I just have a sense of where the glider is, and I'm following it as it tracks off to my left. And this type of practice here will give you a tremendous amount of feel and integration with the glider. Really build your confidence in how the glider behaves. Now you notice I turned around, went to my rear risers, and then laid the glider down gently so that it's not any further damage than it has to be. Be prepared as you inflate your glider in high winds to not only walk towards it to help dissipate some of the energy, but to also apply the brakes rapidly in order to keep the glider from shooting overhead and rolling the leading edge. So we're going to bring it up, turn around, face forward, stand kiting, good position. Ready? We bring her on up. I make the turnaround taking a wrap at the exact same time. And move back and forth across the hill, getting a feel for my control over the glider. If I come off the ground, I keep my feet together, ankles and knees together, so that if I were to come down abruptly, I'd have the ability to land and not hurt myself. If I'm trying to penetrate forward, I'll lean forward, arms behind me and up quite a ways, unless I need to dampen some surge. And again, practicing moving first to my left a little bit. And now I'm going to come back to my right, steering just gently to the right and feeling a sense of where the glider is overhead, so that I'm starting to fine-tune my active piloting skills. I know where that glider is, and I can use the control toggles to keep it positioned accurately. When I decide to put the glider down, I'm going to add a bit of brake, turn, reach to my rear risers, and lay the glider down gently.
See, the sun's messing up. Oh, chop. Man, I got me the glider. Them fellers, they just got them beginner gliders. I got me this comp one. It's only $400. I don't see no reason at all that you got to, start out with them beginner stuff if you're going to be a cross-country guy like me. That's for sure. I'm going to get this. This is you got to get it nice and flat. How come this thing won't stay flat on the ground? Oh no! Now, the key for you to succeed in this dynamic light wind reverse launch is for you to make sure the glider gets all the way up overhead, okay? And I think the way your glider's set up with this side a little higher than that side, we're going to want to have this hand just a little bit higher as you go to make the inflation so the glider will come up nice and square. Now, I'll go ahead and spot you over here. As the glider starts to load up, you'll take a couple more steps backwards. You'll make sure the glider's up overhead, make your rotation, and proceed with the launch. Let's go ahead and get your radio going. I'll check it. There we go, looking good. All right, we have almost no wind at all, don't we? You ready?
Yep.
Feel good?
Yep.
Okay, go ahead. Looks good right there. Make the rotation and run off. Arms behind you. Let's keep knees a little tighter together. Nice job. Marty's going to go ahead and lay his glider out so that he can make an effective launch. You'll see him pull the tips out. And if we had a good breeze, he wouldn't have to pull the tips out quite so far. But since it's very light conditions, he needs to arrange the glider so that it can be brought up into flight in pretty much a horseshoe type shape. And you can see that he has the center part of his glider pushed back. Now Marty's taking a look at his lines to make sure that his lines look like they're in good order. If he's suspicious at all that any of the lines may be caught on a weed or on a rock, he'd maybe jump out of his harness and go take a look at that to make sure that he's not going to have a problem. You don't want to damage your glider. Feel good?
Looks good.
Great. Now, Marty's going to be demonstrating for you a front launch or forward launch this afternoon. Now, when would you do a front launch or forward launch? Well, if you practice a dynamic reverse launch, you can almost always do a reverse launch in light winds or no wind. But there could be situations where you feel as though a front or forward launch would be best. For example, if you've got a bad ankle or a bad knee, or maybe you're at a high altitude spot, a ski area, and you're trying to launch in snow and absolutely no wind. So, if we're going to do a front launch, we have to get set up in the front position, and that means turning around to face forward. And to do that properly so you don't risk dropping a line on your neck, you'll see Marty put all the lines on one side in both hands. So he made a nice bridge, so when he makes the turnaround, he doesn't risk dropping a line on his neck. Now that he's in a forward-facing position, Marty can put the control toggle in his hand, drop the risers over his arm, put the A riser so that it's in his palm, and do the same thing on the other side. And actually this hand here can reach across to assist the other hand. He's now going to feel for pressure that's even on both A's so that he can effect a nice equal launch as he makes the inflation. It is fairly light wind, isn't it?
Pretty nice.
Have fun.
Shall we?
He looks at the glider to make sure that there aren't any weeds or tangles. And why don't you go ahead and fly down? Have fun. And you can see Marty doing a great job of managing his glider in reverse position while being lofted. He wants to be careful just a few feet off the ground, not to be turned around and then come in and land sideways or land without control and fall down. So if you get lofted while doing some reverse kiting, stay in that position, keep those risers locked. And you should practice this in an easy environment. You'll notice his hand position, focusing on that. As he's being lifted, he makes sure those risers lock up. Oops, and he got turned around. Notice he went for his brakes, and that's a good example of why it's terrific to do these kind of practices so that in a safer environment like we have here, you don't risk being too badly put out of place. It's blowing probably about 18 mile an hour right now, so it's a little strong. Now Marty, while doing that, there's money actually falling out of your pocket. Do you think you'll be able to put that back away? Look at this skill. He only does this for money, ladies and gentlemen. Can you come down and give me 5? That was really impressive. Oh no, I meant $5. Now as Marty touches down, one of the skills that's good to develop is being able to reach to like your C risers so that you can put the glider down in stronger winds. And you'll notice Marty turned around, went to his C's, all the while with his full paycheck in hand. In strong wind, we're going to lean back against the glider with a good wall. We don't want to lean forward. If you lean forward, you could fall down and be surfed. In other words, fall on your chest and be pulled along. So let's go ahead and be in a nice athletic position, keeping your hips squared up so that your risers are at the same length, and lean against the wall. Keep a good hand on your C's or rear risers so that you can keep the glider from being lofted. That's your parking brake. That's okay. I developed the ability as a progressing intermediate pilot to, in good user-friendly conditions, to know where your brakes are so that you can be in a reverse position, and if you get picked up, you can then turn around and find your brakes. Now if the glider's getting soft on you at any stage of these positions, you want to really lean forward, sink down a bit, sink into your knees in order to keep the glider well loaded. Now as I get lofted here, I'll go ahead in strong conditions, depending on the situation, but when I'm really concerned about being dragged on landing, I'll try to get up in the air here, kind of a shallow slope, but I want to know where my C risers are so that I can get to the C's while in flight and pull them as I come into land and run at the glider so it's under control. Nice job, Marty. Good. Good job. There he goes. And notice where up Marty's hands are. That's a really good example of him keeping his risers locked. There's an example of him being picked up and deciding to turn around and take a hold of his brake handles.
The reason why we want to hook in reverse to our paraglider is so that we're not in a position to fall backwards and land on our head. By being in a reverse position, you can run towards your paraglider, get to the rear risers, and keep it from getting away from you. So, although this may be something new for you to learn, if you'll just go to the park and practice hooking into your glider, as we've shown you, try that maybe 10 times. You'll be surprised. It won't be all that difficult. It's an important safety item that you wear heavy-duty, ankle-supportive, almost ectoskeletal boots. Ground handling involves a lot of movement on your feet, and it'd be awful for you to sprain an ankle or worse yet break one because you are wearing inadequate footwear. And always wear a helmet. I think it's more likely for you to fall down and hit your head ground handling than it is flying. So to think that just because you're ground handling you don't need a helmet is not the right direction. If you're a new pilot just learning about ground handling and paragliding, we think that it's really important that you practice the reverse aspect of ground handling first. By learning reverse first, which is actually more difficult than learning a front type of inflation, you'll help perfect your skills and integration with the glider all that much better. It will be your basic habit. It will be the skill that you know and understand the best. And it is actually the skill that you're probably going to use most throughout your flying career. There are many different reverse launch techniques. The techniques that we've shown you here, we've found have worked best. Overall, statistically, students seem to advance faster using these particular techniques. But the other ones are certainly usable also. As you advance in your reverse launch techniques using the one that we've shown you, might as well learn some of the others. All of that information is useful to you in your growth as a competent pilot. In your ground handling practice, it's very important that you spend as much time as possible in a forward-facing position. Really try to time yourself. The more forward-facing kiting that you do, the better. Forward-facing kiting with horizon reference, a wrap on your brake line so you can feel every little thing that's going on in your glider, will give you more active piloting skills in flight so that you have authority over pitch and roll control. So remember, practice your forward-facing ground handling as much as you possibly can to fine-tune your active piloting skills. Ground handling practice can help you perfect your ability to anticipate the right weather. Picking the right conditions for ground handling can help you understand what conditions are appropriate for flying. So certainly do all of your meteorology examinations prior to going out and ground handling so you can find what models of atmospherics work best for ground handling.